I will tell you the story about the shaman raising the dead, as told to me by my father. This incident happened when Dad was about, say, 13 or 14. There was a man in the village that had died. He had died from a rotting process. It started at his feet and became rotting of his whole legs. It was unlike gangrene rotting where the leg turns green. The bottom of his feet started to rot like a skin thing, turning black, and yet it worked its way up his legs and then got down again. He would think, aha, my ointment worked, and then the rotting would walk up again and go down again. It got worse through the fall, and then when it got up over his knees, one of his brother's feet started to rot. And then when it got up to about his hips, his second brother started with his feet rotting. And so the parents knew that something was gravely wrong. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that something was wrong. They called in all the shaman that they knew of from across Canada to help. 9 shaman, including a sunstone shaman from Ontario. I think there still is a sunstone shaman there. They're the shaman that are of a higher level of ability and carry a sunstone. It's a little piece of rock that is hard and glassy like a 2-inch diameter marble. It's what you gain when your abilities you're not in control of, but you have an affinity to the sun god. The sunstone proves that you can control the rain, and with prayer and by living by strict rules, the divinity in the sun will make changes as requested. Because of this, the sunstone shaman is a very powerful entity. Along with him were an array of quality human beings, those who reached the god of wind, the bear god, the wolf god, and other lesser deities. By the time these quality human beings reached Gitsan territory from the north, east, and the south, the eldest son had died. He had rotted to death. When they had all assembled, they found that the younger brother's rotting had reached his knees, the next younger brother's rotting had reached his ankles. The first thing the beings did was to go down to the creek that ran by the village. They sat in a circle at the edge of a deep spot in the creek. There they sat straight back, eyes gently closed, impervious of the cold breeze that drifted down the creek. After about 2 hours, as one, they rose and walked into the frigid water, into above their waist, ducked under the water, and then out. 3 times they did this. Then they dried themselves off with pine needles and donned their regalia. Each had their specific costume. The head shaman's headdress was brilliant with bright yellow straw, like shafts intertwined with pure white feathers. His crest appeared to be made of 2 moose horn pans, decorated with beads and porcupine quills. His blanket was a large white goat hide. The man in charge of the bear god wore a large bear hide. His headdress was a bear's head. Around his neck hung a rucksack carrying different emblems collected over the years. Each of the other shaman wore regalia fitting to the level of divinity that they had reached. They then filed up to a little house in which the body of the eldest son was placed. They began burning incense weed inside. Drumming and chanting could be heard. Kids lined up outside in the bushes in the opposite hill watching and hearing felt chills of excitement running up and down their backs. The sunstone shaman came out and broke off a willow branch, went and dipped it into the creek, and circled the cabin chanting. He shook the willow branch at each corner. As he reached the front door, he closed the circle completely. Instantly the cabin disappeared. No longer could the chanting be heard, nor could the incense weed be smelled. The shaman walked into the circle and disappeared as well. He did this by giving his willow branch a final shake behind himself as he entered the building. A couple of people came down to the trail riding horses. They rode right past the cabin, totally oblivious of its existence. They had traveled far to experience the work of those shaman, possibly learn some of their ways. However, with the total secrecy is required, no one is allowed to witness the methods that these shaman use. If this were a hypnotic spell, one would think that it wouldn't affect the riders, since they weren't involved with the original part of the ceremony. No matter, they did not see, hear, or smell anything. After a while, Dad ran down the hill and closed his eyes when he reached the circle the shaman had made. Then he crawled on hands and knees until his head bumped the wall of the cabin. Opening his eyes, he could see the wall, hear the chanting, and smell the incense smoke. He crawled along the wall until he found a knothole. Since this was only a shiplap building, the hole gave him a view of the interior. The shaman circled the body laying in the center of the room. He could see the incense weed smoke circling and thicker in the center as they circled. After a couple of hours, when the smoke became very dense above the body, the head shaman jumped in and placed his hand behind the head and neck, with his other hand on the body's forehead. He sat the body up and slammed it back down on the floor. 4 times he repeated this: up, slam, up, slam, up, slam. After the 4th time, the body's eyes popped open. Dad almost threw up. The body was facing him. The view of the maggots crawling out of one of the eye sockets was horrible. Dad tried his level best not to throw up, because he knew that they would kill him if they caught him witnessing their ceremony. While the man was alive, the people had put maggots on the rotting to keep it clean in the hopes that it might heal. When it had reached his head, the rotting drained an eye. The maggots naturally crawled in. They eat any dead flesh. Dad watched as the body's mouth fell open. He began to tell whom it was that hexed him, the house where the hex came from, why the person hexed him, and where the hex was. He had gotten hexed because he had gone out with a girl whom the witchcraft had thought was his girlfriend. The hex was 140 miles in the bush from where they were. What it was made of was a tree felled against a crutch with a moose hide tied to the top. A little roof covered the tree halfway up. Under the roof part of the tree hung a string tied to a bar. Attached to this bar was a series of different length strings with little emblems on the lower end of these strings. Each little emblem represented one of the family members. The most insidious part of the hex was a bowl of seagull blood mixed with a liquid that kept it from coagulating. The oldest boy's emblem was the lowest. It had a piece of his gum that he chewed, a piece of his hanky, and a bit of hair stuck to the little cross of sticks. It had completely immersed in the blood. What lowered the emblems into the blood was rain being absorbed by the moose hide, which made it heavier, and this bowed the tree. The next brother's was halfway sunk, and the third brother's was about a quarter sunk. Obviously, the whole family was slated to die. The witchcraft was so incensed that he had lost his girlfriend. The bowl of seagull blood demands some explanation. Hundreds of birds are needed to provide enough blood. Each bird is drained slowly, cut by cut, called the death by 1,000 cuts, their tortured souls providing the medium for the hex to work. A special tree sap plus water stops the coagulation of the blood. The death of the oldest boy happened with him screaming and squawking like a dying seagull. The receding of the rotting down the legs of the victims happened as the sun came out. It dried the moose hide a bit. The tree straightened out with the lighter hide lifting the emblem slightly out of the bowl. The rain would re-wet the moose hide, lowering the victim's emblems back into the fluid. their momentary hopes of recovery would be dashed as they would begin screaming and squawking back into the physical and mental destruction planned by the witchcraft. The oldest boy's emblem had been completely immersed in the blood, and he died. After the shaman had learned all that they could from the dead man, the head shaman closed the cadaver eyes and held his hand over the man's mouth until he died again. Quickly Dad crawled out of the circle and up the hill, for the other boys dragged him into the bushes in safety. It was a long time after the shaman had left before he could recount what he had witnessed, so they wouldn't know that their ceremony was witnessed. Then they traveled out into the bush of the location of the hex. They cut the hide down, and as the tree straightened out, lifting the emblems out of the blood, the remaining victims felt an instant relief as the rotting receded off the bottoms of their feet. The head shaman took the emblems, carried down to a creek, and washed them off. 140 miles away, the family shivered uncontrollably. The bear god shaman built a large fire. After praying over the emblems, the head shaman threw the emblems into the fire. The family broke out in a sweat, and oh God, blessed relief and inner happiness not felt in a long while came over them all. Not only had the shaman removed the hex from the family, but it had been reversed on the witchcraft. The poison that he had put out was reversed on him. He began rotting right in the middle of his chest. He went to a doctor in Hazelton who was shocked to find that it was rotting process, not a cancer. It took the same length of time for him to die as it took the oldest boy. He was running around telling everyone, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." After about 6 months, he ran through the village and rolled and fell, landing hard on his back. A hole burst in his chest. Black flies flew out to the shock and horror of the kids who saw it happen. Years later, as Dad recounted the story to a group of children, he withdrew a handful of raisins from his pocket and threw them out. The kids went, "Oh no, poison black flies." They madly brushed the raisins away. That's all I remember.